265 meters above the Mediterranean Sea, Jaan Roose stands on a line thinner than your thumb. Ahead of him, 3.6 kilometers of empty air. Below him, nothing but churning water and the ghosts of ancient myths. One gust of wind, one moment of doubt, one wrong step, and he's gone. For nearly 3 hours, he'll inch forward across the Strait of Messina, a crossing so dangerous, even fellow daredevils called it suicide. The line will sway, his legs will shake, and with just 80 meters left, his foot will slip. This is the story of the world's most insane slackline walk, and the moment that nearly ended it all. Jaan Roose doesn't look like a superhuman. Lanky, blue-eyed, with a quiet demeanor. He could pass for a software developer from his native Estonia. But put him on a slackline, and something changes. The man transforms into something else entirely. Growing up in a tiny Estonian village, Roose spent his childhood doing parkour, jumping between rooftops and walls, building courage one leap at a time. At 18, he discovered slacklining online, the art of walking across tension webbing suspended in the air. Most people try it once at a park, wobble for 30 seconds and give up. Roose became obsessed. Within years, he wasn't just walking lines. He was performing tricks that defied physics. Double backflips on a slackline, hanging upside down 200 meters above city streets, lying flat on webbing barely wider than his hand. He became a 3-time world slackline champion, the only person ever to land a double backflip on a line. Hollywood came calling. Roose worked as a stuntman in Assassin's Creed and Wonder Woman 1984, performing stunts most actors wouldn't dream of attempting. RedBull noticed. They signed him to their team and started funding increasingly wild projects. In Dubai, Roose walked a high line between 2 skyscrapers, 355 and 309 meters tall, performing tricks that made crowds gasp and cover their eyes. He crossed the Bosphorus Strait in Turkey, literally walking between 2 continents, Asia and Europe. But even for a man who'd done the impossible, there was one crossing that haunted him: the Strait of Messina. In 2018, during the World Slackline Cup Tour, Roose had attempted a similar Italian crossing. He failed. The memory burned in his mind for 6 years, July 2024. He was ready to try again. This time, he wouldn't just cross it, he'd make history. The crossing. The Strait of Messina is no ordinary body of water. For thousands of years, it's been feared by sailors. Ancient Greeks told stories of Scylla and Charybdis, the 6-headed monster and the whirlpool that devoured ships whole. The waters below are violent, unpredictable, deadly. And Roose wanted to walk above it. On July 10, 2024, he stood at the base of the Santa Trata pylon in Via San Giovanni, a massive rusty tower rising 265 meters into the sky, taller than Italy's tallest skyscraper. His plan was audacious: stretch a slackline 3,646 meters across the strait to Sicily's Torre Faro Tower. That's 3.6 kilometers, over 2 miles, on a piece of webbing 1.9 centimeters wide, roughly the thickness of your finger. No one had ever attempted anything close to this scale. His 8-person crew worked through the night. A helicopter carried a pilot rope between the towers. Custom winches tensioned the yellow webbing to exact specifications. Every calculation had to be perfect. Too loose, and the line would sway uncontrollably. Too tight, and it could snap. At 8:45 a.m., with the sun rising over the Mediterranean, Roose tightened his safety harness, took one last breath of solid ground, and stepped onto the line. Instantly, he was in another world. The tower behind him disappeared. The sea below seemed endless. The distant Sicilian tower looked impossibly far, a tiny speck on the horizon. Support cables kept him tethered in his harness, but they felt like a fragile promise in a hostile environment. The line stretched ahead like a razor-thin path through the sky, and Roose began to walk. The walk. Each step was a negotiation with physics and fear. The webbing trembled beneath his feet. Wind gusts, up to 38 kilometers per hour, tried to knock him sideways. The morning sun climbed higher, pushing temperatures toward 28 degrees Celsius. His muscles screamed. His focus narrowed to nothing but the next step, the next breath, the next moment of balance. Hundreds of meters below, the Mediterranean sparkled innocently. But Roose knew the truth. At this height, the water might as well be concrete. A fall meant death, harness or no harness. He moved in tiny trembling steps, each one precise, controlled. His arms extended for balance, his core tight, his eyes locked on the line. The towers were at different heights, which meant the line wasn't level. First, he'd descend. Then, worst of all, he'd have to walk uphill for the final 130 meters. Imagine walking uphill on a tightrope after nearly 3 hours of balancing. Parts of the line dipped as low as 100 meters above the sea. Small pendulum loops hung from the webbing to control sway, but they could only do so much. Fellow slackliners described the experience. Constant fear, dizziness, the sensation that your mind is screaming at you to stop, to give up, to get back to solid ground. But Roose kept moving. 1 hour passed, then 2. His legs burned. His breath came in controlled gasps. The distant tower grew larger, but painfully slowly. He'd already walked beyond the standing world record of 2,710 meters, but the rules were brutal. To officially claim the record, he had to finish without falling. A single slip meant nothing. At 2 hours and 57 minutes, with only 80 meters left, disaster struck. His foot slipped. For one terrible instant, Roose felt the line disappear beneath him. His body lurched sideways. The world spun. He was falling. The safety harness caught him with a violent jerk. He hung there, suspended above the strait, swaying in the wind. His heart hammered against his ribs. The crowd below gasped. His crew held their breath. For a moment, it seemed everything was lost. But Jaan Roose isn't like most people. Hanging in his harness, he punched the air and shouted a defiant curse. The shock wore off. The panic faded. And something else took over. Something harder than fear. Determination. He had a small backpack on the line with water and gear. He grabbed it, took a drink, shook out the adrenaline, and looked up at the webbing above him. Then he climbed back on. The finish. The world watched in stunned silence. Roose stood on the line again, 80 meters from the tower. So close. But the fall meant he'd lost the official world record. The rules were clear. One slip, and it didn't count. Yet he kept walking. On his helmet, he'd painted a Spanish phrase, casi perfecto, almost perfect. It became prophetic. His muscles screamed. His balance wavered. Wind battered him from every angle. But step by trembling step, he moved forward. The Sicily Tower grew larger. The crowd on both shores began to cheer, their voices carrying across the water. 60 meters, 50, 40. His legs felt like they'd give out. His mind fought through exhaustion and terror. But Roose had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. Every parkour jump in Estonia, every slackline trick, every failed attempt had led here. 20 meters, 10. And then, after 3 hours and 4 minutes of walking, Jaan Roose placed his foot on the Sicilian Tower. The crowd erupted. He'd done it. He'd walked the Strait of Messina, a crossing no one in history had ever completed on a slackline. Though the fall disqualified him from the official Guinness record, he'd walked farther than anyone ever had. He'd bridged the mythic divide between Scylla and Charybdis on a line thinner than a finger. "I feel Jaan-tastic," he said into a microphone, his voice shaking with exhaustion and joy. "I am super happy, a bit tired and worn out. But guys, I made history. Social media exploded. The hashtag Jaan-tastic trended worldwide. RedBull's broadcast drew millions. Even Sicilians, long frustrated by canceled ferries and empty promises of a bridge, celebrated this human bridge of a different kind. Roose had lost the record, but he'd won something bigger. Legend. Jaan Roose's walk across the Strait of Messina wasn't just an athletic achievement. It was a reminder that the line between life and death, success and failure, can be thinner than we think. That sometimes the most dangerous step isn't the one where you fall, it's the one where you choose to get back up. Later, Rose would joke that being back on solid ground felt surreal, that the line, only as thick as a finger, had become his entire world for 3 hours, that the fall was full of surprises from start to finish. But for everyone watching, it was more than surprises. It was a glimpse of human potential at its absolute edge. A man refusing to quit when everything said he should. Stay curious, stay bold, and remember, sometimes the only way forward is one step at a time.